chairperson of ANPAC, you were recently quoted as saying that legislators, government officials, and ordinary citizens who fail to report corruption at all levels are doing a disservice to the nation. It appears, and analysts concur, that even when corruption is reported, nothing appears to be done about it. We did hear from the Deputy Commissioner ZACC earlier. I cite, for example, the 2019 Auditor General's report showing alleged corruption in both local authorities and state-owned enterprises. So, Honourable Mliswa, in your view, what is the scale and impact of public sector corruption in Zimbabwe?
Thank you very much, Andy. I think most of the reports from the Auditor General's office talk to that in terms of the level of corruption. And I think what is also important is to appreciate that there's nothing that's done. I think the previous speaker, Dr. Amore, spoke about being on a treadmill. You are running the same position, but the position is not changing. So that, I think, is where we are as a country, where I think there's no more confidence in the public. And institutions like ZACC, who have been aggressive and I think have been doing a good job, are fought back. And fought back through a smear campaign, myself included. The more you expose it, the more enemies you create, and the more you're fought back. But it can only give you determination to be able to do that. The public itself, we need to revisit our DNAs as Zimbabweans, that we want the struggle against racism, against the Smith regime. But where is the DNA to keep fighting corruption if we were prepared to sacrifice our lives for this country? Why are we not sacrificing ourselves to expose corruption? I've always said that failure to expose corruption bites you too. As a politician, I've said, I see people who say, I didn't vote, and they actually have drinks, they pop champagne for not voting. But when the economic hardship hits you, it does not dissect those who voted and those who did not vote. You suffer the same consequences as those who voted. So my appeal to the public really is to say, we've got to really visit the founding principles of the struggle of our country. And that, I think, will put us in a better position despite the forces that at play. I've always said that I will speak even if nothing happens about it, but the records will remain.
Honourable Minister, before I move on to Commissioner Makamure, there is a huge impact of corruption, for example, on the budget, money that's allocated for various services or various infrastructure projects. And of course, some of that money is being lost through corruption. And also, of course, the provision of services to citizens, and of course the corruption and the impact it has on citizens' taxes, because the government needs to raise more and more money as more and more is leaked. What would be your comment to those views?
If we have to be honest, the biggest problem we have, and I see Honorable Mshori is here, Honorable Temba Mliswa is here as legislators, we burn midnight candles to pass the budget. We burn midnight candles to pass the budget. This ministry must be given this much, Parliament must be given this much. Only 30% of what we've been approved is given. That's the source of corruption. The Minister of Finance must be honest and say, I've got 2 billion only. And the 2 billion I have, I can only disburse so much, and it is disbursed immediately. And the biggest corruption and the biggest fraud ever is from the fiscus itself, from the Minister of Finance, who promises money to government entities, to Parliament, to institutions, yet he does not disburse the money. So if you are short of 70% and you are given 30%, what do you expect people to engage in? Corruption. So let's not beat about the bush. Give people all the resources that they need. Once you give them the resources, then ask them to account. But if 30% is what is given to everyone, then the other 70 people are short, they'll resort to corruption at the end of the day. I've always said that is the biggest problem we have, in that the Minister of Finance does not disburse the monies that would have agreed upon timelessly, does not come back to the August House for a supplementary budget considering the inflation which is there. So everybody's so changed. So everybody resorts to corruption.
Thank you, Hon Mliswa. And it will be interesting in the launch of the report later to actually understand exactly how many people in Zimbabwe have been subjected to paying bribes or corrupt practices and who has done that. So we look forward to that report launch later. Commissioner Makamure, the Speaker of Parliament, Advocate Jacob Mudenda, was quoted as saying that although ZACC and other anti-corruption agencies are exposing, combating and eradicating corruption and the abuse of power by those holding political and public office, he went on to say, and I'll quote, he said, ZACC has been found wanting in a number of areas, which include the catch and release, as well as for the lack of teeth to prosecute high-profile figures allegedly caught up in corrupt activities. Commissioner, you've cited the AG's 2019 report, and I believe your commission has, and of course in that alleged abuse by local authorities and state-owned enterprises, their corrupt activities was highlighted. Perception is, however, and I think it's unfortunate the Deputy Commissioner is here, but you're the spokesperson, is however that ZACC is not addressing issues or taking action raised in the report as it relates to those two areas. Your comment, does ZACC lack the teeth to prosecute or investigate properly?
Thank you very much. And let me say that the Commission has got teeth that bite. I think it's very important to understand the mandate of the Commission. The mandate of the Commission is to investigate cases of suspected corruption for prosecution and asset recovery. So that is the investigation side. Then the other very important, equally important component is prevention of corruption. So when we investigate, we prepare dockets, we submit to Reza here to prosecute. But we are all agencies who work in the criminal justice system. So we work together. We have an MOU with NPA, we have an MOU with ZRP, JSC, and many others, because we believe in the collaborative approach. So, in our investigations, we bite very, very well. And we prepare the dockets, and we are not afraid to tackle even very high-profile corruption cases. And evidence is there. There are cases before the courts at different stages. So that's our mandate. But we have an interest to ensure that there is successful prosecution, but we don't prosecute. But we have an interest to make sure that our investigations are thorough, that the dockets can lead to a conviction. So the Speaker, when he said has been found wanting, it's not that we are not effective in our mandate. I think I was in that meeting in Blawayo. He referred to other issues, not necessarily that the investigations, the mandate that we are executing, we are not doing it, we are found wanting.
But Commissioner, so what would you say, sorry to jump in there, but what would you say to those who say that we've received the 2019 Auditor General's report, and I'm sure we've had the 2018 or 2017 in there, it's highlighted corruption in the public sector, yet now you talk about your mandate of prosecuting and getting people to Mr. Reza there, but we're not really seeing people getting to Mr. Reza there based on the report or the information contained in Madam Chiri's report.
On the contrary end, we are very much seized with the Auditor General's reports. And we're actually working very closely with key institutions like the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, the Auditor General herself, we have got an MOU, and the Deputy Chair, in his address, he referred to the issue of Auditor General's reports, what we have done so far. We do look at the Auditor General's reports. we identify cases or issues that relate to corruption. So what I want to say here is, not everything that the Auditor General says is corruption. So when the reporting has been produced, we do an analysis and we pick out issues that we believe are corruption related. Then we follow up on those issues. We have conducted several roundtables with senior officials in ministries, in local authorities, in various government departments. There are cases that we are currently pursuing arising from the Auditor General's reports. I can't divulge the details, but there are several that we are currently pursuing. And it's not only the annual report of the Auditor General, it's also forensic reports that are produced from time to time. We are seized with all that.
I mean, just an aside, reading the Auditor General's report, it appears that there are instances across most local authorities, there are instances across a lot of state-owned enterprises. I won't mention some of them, but I think ZACC is one that comes up in the report all the time. Manpower, resources, I mean, this is a lot of work to go around all the different local authorities around the country as well as the state-owned enterprises. Can you do it?
Yes, we can. You see, this is why this commission has pursued a collaborative approach. Because on our own, it's very difficult, I agree with you, but through collaboration. So, TIZ, let me give an example, is one of our key partners, and I want to commend TIZ for not now becoming armchair critics. They're quite very proactive. So we leverage on the resources of various partners to be able to tackle this mammoth task. Yes, without doing that, of course, we want to commend government for trying under the circumstances to avail budgetary resources to the commission, but the funds are never adequate. So we need to be working with various partners, leverage on their resources. This is why we came up with the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which is an implementation framework that tries to give meaning to this collaborative approach, where a stakeholder is actually given space to lead certain initiatives under the framework of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. So yes, that is a better way of trying to address
so in fact, it's why we're here as an Indaba. All stakeholders here, all committed to working against corruption and also dialoguing and communicating transparently. Let me come to you, Mr. Reza. Michael, and I know we've had conversations about this in the past, but this issue of catch and release, it's been cited numerous times as one example that sends a message that corruption can pay. This is my first question to you. What would be your response to that criticism? I know we've spoken about this before.
Thank you, Andy. At the outset, let me say I remove my tattered hat in salute to the quality of dockets that are coming from ZACC and the Zimbabwe Republic Police. The evidence is overwhelming. Corruption and fraud are crimes of deception. What these people do when they've stolen the money, they've, up to a certain point, succeeded in hiding that money very well. But as I said earlier, ZACC and ZRP have been able to go behind and find that evidence. It is now there in the dockets. We have now come to the problem which you refer to catch and release. We are obliged to send all documents, every piece of information that we intend to use, we give it to the accused person. So he or she sits down with his lawyer. They go through and see what defense they can possibly mount. They find they have none. All the evidence is there. The prosecutors are there. I have referred to this on another forum. There is creeping into Zimbabwe and other countries as well a new phenomenon called the Stalingrad defense mechanism. is a mechanism where the lawyer will make an application at each and every stage. And when I say each and every stage, I mean it. They will start by making an application against placement on remand. We oppose it, and the court rules against them. They make an appeal to the High Court. They will then make an application challenging, saying the judge does not disclose an offense. They will make another application saying this, they will make an application for that. Let me hasten to add and say, all those applications are provided for in the statutes. The lawyers are very careful. They will not make an application which is not provided for, but they will make some of the most unmeritorious applications we have ever seen. I am currently dealing with a case where the one accused person is represented by 4 lawyers. 4. One of them is an advocate. What they've said is each one of those lawyers has a specific role that he is playing. So if he or she if he's not there, trial cannot proceed because who will be doing his work? Sometime last week we had to remand the case, but we are waiting for a ruling. That trial is not likely to go anywhere. And let me say as well, the Constitution, the current Constitution says an accused person is represented by a lawyer of his own choice. So if he says, I want to be represented by lawyer X, and the lawyer X says he is a matter in the High Court, what it simply means is the magistrate's court case is put aside until such time as that lawyer is available.
Michael, I'd like to jump in there because it's the issue about catch and release, I remember in our discussion, was that under our Constitution, everybody is allowed bail. Is this correct?
That is correct, yes.
Therefore, when you say catch and release, if someone's arrested, they go to court, but they can ask for bail and normally would get it. And so, therefore, it's not really a catch and release, is it? So that brings the question then, that should we be looking at, to the parliamentarians here, some form of legislation that closes that gap, particularly when it comes to corruption cases? Is that something that the MPA would recommend, for example, to the authorities to consider?
Before the coming into operation of our current constitution, the accused person on arrest was the one who was supposed to make an application for bail. The current constitution says, as soon as an accused person walks into court, that person is entitled to bail. The state must prove that that person is not a suitable candidate for bail, and that is a mountain to climb. But as you can see, there are so many of accused persons who have been denied bail. It comes to a point where sometimes I had to say in Shona, kana zvaoma kushanda nepfungwa ndotoshanda nesimba, so that we ensure that this phenomenon of catch and release does not appear. But the people are being granted bail. And when they've been granted bail, and the lawyers are making all this, the people out there, they read that so-and-so has been arrested. A week or later, they see him walking the street. And 9 times out of 10, they will say, don't worry, everything is sorted out. I've spoken with the prosecutor, I've spoken with the magistrate, and they will be lying through their teeth.
I think this is, I suppose, throwing that back to the legislators, to Parliament, to see what can be done. Yes, please, if you have a microphone. Very quickly.
I think this is where the show begins. You were sitting on over 300 dockets from ZACC, and I thought ZACC would bring this up. Over 300 dockets. The MPA was sitting on them. There's a waste of taxpayers' money. It's only now that the acting prosecutor general has dealt with at least over 100. So why were you sitting on 300 dockets? If you're telling me that there is collaboration, and this is where ZACC has been found wanting. They are now attacked for arresting, yet they don't prosecute. The Prosecutor General's office is the most incompetent ever. I've been arrested over 70 times, acquitted over 70 times. In any country, the Commissioner General, the Prosecutor General would lose a job because it's a waste of taxpayers' money. Imagine 70 cases and you are acquitted and you stand in court. The cases that you pursue are political. You are arresting people like Hopewell on flimsy charges, yet money is being stolen by the politicians. Us politicians are stealing, and you're not prepared to touch it.
Okay,
You are receiving instructions from politicians. Let me be very clear. We will never achieve this. When talking about political will, there is no political will because the Minister of Justice is a political appointment, and you have got to consult him in terms of the Act. NPA is not independent. ZACC is not independent. There is no institution which is independent as long as you say it must consult the minister. The minister belongs to a certain party. He will never allow his party to be exposed because they will lose power. So let's be honest. Why were you sitting on 300 dockets which ZACC has done, a waste of taxpayers' money, and you think as Parliament we must support that?
thank you, Honourable. Michael, of course you're going to respond, but when you respond to Honourable Mliswa's comments, I think he's brought up something which I was going to ask you, but I might as well ask you now. It's this issue of the perceived hesitancy by the National Prosecuting Authority to prosecute political or politically elite-connected people. I think that's the impression. I think Honourable Mliswa has put it from his opinion there. So I think the question is, of course, responding to him, but the question is, do you tread softly when it comes to dealing with corruption involving political elites? I suppose it also applies to ZACC. I mean, it appears that some allege that some high-profile cases are never really successfully prosecuted, even though there's huge announcements in the newspapers that such and such has been arrested, nothing really happens. So, Michael, maybe you could respond to Honourable Mliswa and also that comment.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying it is not correct, with the greatest of respect, Honourable, to say that the NPA was sitting on over 300 dockets. That is not factually correct. The situation is we have dockets that have come from ZACC, we have dockets that have come from ZRP. They are at different stages of prosecution. We cannot rush and say we want to make people happy, we are going to take people into court when there is an application which has been made. We can do it, yes, but what is the end result? The result is that when that person takes that matter on review to a superior court where he was denied to make an application in court, what the judge will simply do is he will rule that it was a mistrial. And when that happens, the judge can only make one ruling, which is not guilty and acquitted. And let me tell you this, ZACC and police will have done their work. They will have investigated. If I sit here as acting Deputy Prosecutor General and I allow something that I know is going to kill a case so that I make people happy, I will be failing in my duty. I stand here, you can lambast me, but if an accused person, if of the 300 dockets, 50 of them are subject to an application, I shall instruct my subordinates to respond to those applications appropriately. Wait for a ruling, and then when that ruling is given, then the matter can proceed. Let me now go and address Andy very quickly. The issue that the NPA...
with political elites. The people are saying that the NPA maybe treads too softly with political elites when it comes to corruption cases.
Very well. I do not know what that means when they say they are treating them softly. Are they saying we are consenting to them being admitted to bail? Are they saying we are not prosecuting effectively?
Yes. I think that is what that analysts and commentators are saying.
Let me say this. When a matter comes into court, there is always that possibility that a person is going to be either acquitted or that person is going to be convicted. Let me, without mentioning, without saying anything in particular, but let us suppose a person is arrested. He is a politically exposed person. He is arrested. He comes to court because there are allegations that he gave an unlawful order. ZACC arrests that person. That person comes to court. Now, when the investigations are completed, it turns out that there is nothing written that the person said, go and give a contract to this company. There is nothing written. All what we are saying is what we read in the press is he gave an order to say grant contract to this company. Where was the instruction? And his defense is, I never gave that instruction. And you want the NPA to manufacture from Norway evidence and say you gave that so that will make you happy. How can it, suppose it happens to you?
So Michael, let me jump in there. So are you saying the NPA has no fear or favor? It doesn't matter who that person is, how high they are, whether they're clearly connected, minister, for example, you will prosecute based on evidence. Is this what your assurance is to this Indaba?
Andy, read my lips. His Excellency, the President of this country, has said there will be no sacred cows. Who am I to sit and say that one is a sacred cow? That when His Excellency himself has said there are no sacred cows.
Okay.
And let me just conclude by saying, as I sit here, I have never, and I repeat, never been given any instruction by any politician to say that person must go to prison or that person must be set free. Not even across the road. I have not spoken to any politician who has given instruction.
All right. I know Commissioner Makamure wants to come in, but before you do, John, Mr. Gondo has been sitting there quite patiently as he listens.
I thought what I want to say is related.
Okay, very, very quickly if you can.
Yeah, as far as ZACC is concerned, will investigate suspected corruption without any fear or favor. And examples about several cabinet ministers, it's in the public domain, have been arrested, lost their jobs. Senior government officials have been arrested, lost their jobs. In the private sector as well, senior people there have been investigated. So on that, in that area, as far as ZACC is concerned, there is no interference. And, yes, and then what he was saying is you have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that an offense was committed. This is where there is a problem, beyond any reasonable doubt. If someone is given a verbal instruction that you have to give Makamure a tender, how do you prove beyond any reasonable doubt? So those are some of the challenges. Okay. But I'm interested in a way forward. The deputy chair, in his address, he spoke about looking at court rules. So this issue has been debated over and over again. And even in the National Anti-Corruption Strategy Steering Committee, which is a high-level committee, the issue was on the agenda. And it was agreed that we need to look at court rules. Okay. And the work is underway so that we have stipulated time frames by which corruption matters are dealt with. So that even if there are these frivolous and many of these applications, you know that within 12 months or 6 months, the matter has to be finalized. So if we must all support those reforms. Because there is an acknowledgement there is a problem and there are reforms underway. This is where, as stakeholders, we must come in and support those reforms. Then we'll be able to deal with that problem.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. Mr. Gondo, thank you for being very patient and waiting there, because of course you represent the Procurement Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe, which is a critical component. Because I'll give you some numbers. In most developing countries, public procurement constitutes an average of about 5% of GDP, as well as about 20% of public expenditure, which in Zimbabwe's case we run into billions. of dollars, if I can put it that way. Public procurement processes, of course, provide government with an opportunity to ensure it obtains goods or services at the best price or quality, and that the process of obtaining them is, and this is the key, transparent and competitive. We're looking at the 2019 Auditor General's report as a good example, showing some of the systemic holes in public procurement amongst local authorities, as well as state-owned enterprises. And of course, I refer to the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Act, which is, I believe, one of the defining legislation that defines procurement in Zimbabwe. But commentators state, sir, that controlling corruption is a key goal of public procurement, legal and institutional frameworks, complemented, of course, by the criminal justice system, the police, the prosecutors, and so forth. But something appears to be lacking if we keep on seeing these alleged procurement misadventures, if I can call them that, in local authorities and state-owned enterprises. Your comment?
Thank you very much, Andy. Suffice to start by saying that we do have a reformed act since 2018, which is very much in line with international best practice. My personal feeling is the way we interpret these figures that you have just given. The fact that the Auditor General actually goes and highlights this issue as misprocurement, it means that we've got a system, we've got standards that are set. We work hand in hand with them, and maybe the challenge now is, what are we doing about those issues that have been highlighted? But in terms of the legal framework, the institutional arrangement, the government of Zimbabwe since 2018 has professionalized and decentralized public procurement. By this I mean that the state entities, the state-owned entities are now responsible for their own procurement. Unlike in the past where you had a state procurement board, you now have PRAZ as a regulator, as a referee. So the rules are now clear that the heads of the government institutions, the ministries where you are headed by the permanent secretaries, are now accountable for the manner in which they conduct procurement. The rules that we abide by, like I alluded to, are very much in line with international best practice. In terms of implementation, in terms of transparency, we still have some way to go. Best practice now dictates that you also have to use electronic means to conduct a public procurement so that there is greater transparency. So far, in terms of transparency, what we can just talk about are issues to do with publication of tenders. The rules do not allow that tenders are issued in secrecy. Contract opportunities must be afforded to all potential bidders. We also need to advertise the results of a tender in the same manner that would have advertised the opportunity for the tender. That is being done in the mainstream media. But we need to go further, and this is what, as a regulator, we are working on, introducing what we call electronic government procurement systems. Currently, our systems are still very manual and subjected to a lot of human interference. So these are the challenges that we are working on, and
so when you say that and you're working on these timelines, because as I said, we're talking about billions of dollars of public procurement, and it has a huge impact, of course, corruption, particularly local authorities, not just in state-owned enterprises, but local authorities in particular. The Auditor General's report shows numerous cases of procurement infringements in local authorities, rural local authorities, as well as urban ones. What is your timeline? How quickly are you working towards plugging at least the majority of these holes? We appreciate that leakages always exist, but how quickly is PRAZ doing?
The government of Zimbabwe has taken a deliberate step. When the reforms were done in 2018, the World Bank and other funders had promised that they will fund the e-government procurement system. Somewhere along the lines, obviously, due to our reasons best known to them, the offers were withdrawn. But what we are currently doing is using our own internal resources funded by Treasury. We are now implementing electronic government procurement systems in a piecemeal fashion. I think by the end of the third quarter, we should now be able to have a system that all registered bidders, if say an entity such as the ZACC wants to procure vehicles, all bidders that are registered with the Procurement Regulatory Authority should be able to receive notification of that tender. But I must also hasten to say that we cannot talk about transparency without also alluding to the issues of integrity. You know, the current piece of legislation affords losing bidders the opportunity to challenge the procurement process at any stage of the procurement process, from the way the bidding document is designed. By this I mean from the way that people describe the things that they want. Things can be described in such a manner that they favor a certain bidder. You know, so so there's very much there are very much provision for enhancements of integrity. They can challenge the bidding period, that it is too short, we need more time to respond to the tenders. They can challenge the outcome of a tendering process, because the law provides that before awarding a contract, the state entity must notify all the bidders that they have lost and that bidder A has won, and if they've got issues with that, they've got a window period to challenge that.
Mr Gondo, obviously your PRAZ cites the Auditor General's report, and you notice some of the anomalies raised by the AG in terms of procurement. How closely does PRAZ, or does PRAZ work in any way with agencies such as ZACC or the MPA and investigate some of these alleged anomalies, particularly coming out of the AG report?
Again, we have to be guided. All statutory institutions, such as PRAZ, the functions are defined in an act. We have certain functions and we've got certain powers. We do have investigative powers where we feel that procurement processes have been violated. We work closely with ZACC. We do have an MOU, and incidentally, we actually trying to come up with a training program for involving all stakeholders in law enforcement with respect to procurement processes. So we do work closely with other law enforcement agents. And I must also hasten to say, we work closely again with Transparency International Zimbabwe in trying sometimes to help in terms of even such things as funding some of this training. So we work closely with even the Auditor General's office.
Thank you. Honourable Mliswa, I want to come to you because I think you'd have some strong views on this issue of lack of political will when it comes to prosecuting so-called political elites in Zimbabwe. What are your views on that?
You see, we need to collaborate honestly. ZACC, it would be unfair for you not to tell this crowd how many dockets you've given the APA. I think it would be totally unfaithful and insincere of you. We were together in Bulawayo with the Prosecutor General's office. Honorable Temba Mliswa, when I talked 200 dockets and the Speaker corrected me and said over 300. I don't want to be a legislator who's like somebody who's not honest. We are dealing with issues, and for you not to say to the crowd the truth of the dockets you've given NPA, you then failed your job. That's corruption on its own. And you must, Mr. Makamure, you must be able to say, because you've been coming to us as parliamentarians to get this to happen. And can you be honest and tell Mr. Reza how many dockets were sitting, and now since there's a new acting prosecutor general, how many have started moving? Because I think it would be insincere and totally corrupt of you as an institution if you do not report that. The vice chairperson is here. We need to be honest, because we risk, by me saying that I'm risking my own life for the good of the country. And we must be honest, this is not a joke.
Well, let's Commissioner Makamure. That deserves a response.
Thank you very much, Moderator Andy. In 2020, we had a target of 80 commissioners are here, they will correct me where I'm wrong. We had a target of 80-something dockets. We submitted just over 80 dockets to the National Prosecuting Authority for prosecution. Then in 2021, our target was 180 dockets, and we submitted just over about 185 dockets to the NPA. But you see, these dockets, some of them are minor, cases. So for 2021, we're not looking, for 2022, we're not looking merely at numbers. We are looking at the quality of cases that we investigate. We are emphasizing more on high-profile cases because the Constitution empowers us to refer matters to the ZACC. So some of these petty crimes that come to ZACC, we refer to ZACC. And there are many other complaints that come to ZACC of an administrative nature. So we refer to the relevant institutions, departments for further management.
So this number of 300...
I haven't finished.
Okay.
Numbers can be, I talked about, the targets that we had already submitted. They can be carry-over dockets. But let me say, we are happy that the majority of these dockets are at different stages of processing in the criminal justice system. So they haven't been lost or thrown away. They're at different stages of processing.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's all I can say.
Okay,
Yes.
So the dockets are there, but depending on how you look at them and the numbers, and maybe they're carried over.
But carry over dockets, but
you do not sit on dockets. I think this is what Honorable Mliswa was saying. You're not sitting on them, right?
when we thoroughly investigate.
Michael wants to come in there.
Indeed. You see, the statement by Honorable Mliswa was very simple, straightforward, and unambiguous. He said the NPA has over 300 dockets sitting. He went on to say it's a waste of taxpayers' money. I was head of English department at kindergarten. What that means is there are 300 dockets in a corner collecting dust and nothing is being done about it. That is where I said that is not correct. Whatever docket is in my office, something is being done about it.
Okay.
There could be 500, but they are not sitting. Those dockets are being attended to. Some of them are in the High Court, some of them are in the Magistrates Court, in the regional courts, some of them are in the provincial court, some are in Chitungisa. There is not one docket which is gathering dust and an expense to the taxpayer. If that were to happen, then I really would be an embarrassment. We're working for an organization. That is an embarrassment.
Gentlemen, thank you. I don't know, Honorable Mliswa, I think we need to move on from this because we've discussed this.
We'll move on, but there is also no point moving on when we've not established certain facts. The whole point of investigating is to ensure that the Prosecutor General prosecutes in a certain time. Understand that? In a certain time. Maybe Mr. Reza can issue a statement to say the dockets which anti-corruption has given them have taken how long to see the end of the day. You cannot have a situation, that's what I'm saying, it's a waste of taxpayers' money. Not only that, evidence gets destroyed. People die. And when they die, there's no case to pursue. So for as long as they're not disposed of and there's no judgment, they're sitting in the National Prosecutor's Office. They can only not be said to be sitting in there once judgment and the case has gone for trial and there's judgment. So we must understand that the end of the case is judgment. Before there's judgment, the Prosecutor General's Office is handling that. I think we must be very clear about that. The other issue on PRAZ, which I wanted to talk about, is PRAZ, you are being unprofessional and dishonest to the President of this country. One, PRAZ must never be in anybody's office. PRAZ resides in the office of the Vice President. I'm not saying that the Vice President is a bad person, no. But from a discharge point of view, PRAZ must be totally independent. They cannot be in anybody's office. Because once you're in anybody's office, that poor person influences naturally. So why are you in the office of the Vice President? Two, there are cabinet decisions which have been made for tender. Emergency case goes before cabinet. A good case is Honorable July Moyo on these pumps with Paul Kruger. They go before cabinet. Cabinet has no power over PRAZ. I'm telling you today as a legislator, you might not say it because you're scared you might be fired, but not me. Cabinet has no power over PRAZ. Why are you allowing cabinet to have power over PRAZ? Why is cabinet making decisions violating PRAZ? And why are you not telling the president the truth?
All right, so I think let me jump in there. Mr. Gondo, I'm not sure that you
must answer. You must, Andy, you must answer. Why is cabinet presiding over tenders when they don't have the power to do that? PRAZ is responsible for that.
Let's get PRAZ to answer. Mr. Gondo, would you like to tackle that question, or at least some of the comments from the Honourable?
Let's deal with issues, and that's what is important.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Honourable Mliswa on several occasions, and I must say he speaks from the heart. However, some of the issues are constitutional. When we have an act that says, a certain agency reports to the office of the Vice President, the issue from a government perspective is that certain key ministries, commercial ministries, are all managed from the office of the Vice President. And if people think that is not the best way to do it, I don't think it's really a debate that we can. It's for the principals to decide how to manage those things. Okay. Then, in terms of the manner in which certain tenders happen, there are certain issues of national interest that when you have issues such as there's a crisis in terms of transport, Cabinet does not give a directive in terms of where to source buses from. But Cabinet sometimes says this is now a national procurement. So that in terms of dealing with that, where PRAZ can help, can facilitate the processes. I'm not sure whether that will be tantamount to interference or not, Honourable, but this is something that we can always discuss, that you can always engage in.
I think we can continue this discussion, and unfortunately I do want to get to the audience and to the participants to also ask questions. But I'm going to ask you all one final question. And then let me start with you, Mr. Gondo, as you were the last speaker. This is the issue that Advocate Mudenda, the Speaker of the House of Parliament, mentioned. He talked about perceived policy gaps in the fight against corruption. And I think he was very strong about that. I think Commissioner Makamure, you were at the meeting when he raised these issues. So from a PRAZ perspective, I appreciate that you follow what the regulations and rules tell you, but however, you must obviously give recommendations and hints and tips to your principals on what can be done better. So, in your view, what can be done better in procurement?
In terms of procurement, what needs to be done, I think areas of improvement is to enhance the objective of transparency. And like I alluded to, we need to make these processes electronic. We need to remove certain barriers. We will find that certain eligible bidders are failing to participate in these processes for reasons such as having to come from wherever they are to physically submit tender. And sometimes when you create such barriers, it means that potentially good bidders are excluded from the systems. So we need to gravitate our processes towards electronic means.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Makamure, let me ask you the same question. I'll ask you to be brief, so I do want to get to the audience. What would be your comments? What are the perceived policy gaps that you see as ZACC that you would like changed, amended, or at least lobby the legislators who are here today to assist you to do that?
Let me say, the policy, legal, and institutional framework in Zimbabwe is quite strong, but of course subject to further improvement. So whistleblower protection, we are happy that the principles of the two pieces of legislation have been approved by Cabinet. But what we want to urge the members of Parliament who are here and the Attorney General's office, which is responsible for drafting, is now to speed up the drafting, gazetting, so that it goes through the parliamentary process. So that's a very important piece of legislation because anti-corruption fight depends. Witnesses and whistleblowers are vital in any anti-corruption fight. If you look at our functions as ZACC, one of our functions is to make recommendations to government on measures to enhance integrity and prevent improper conduct. So what we do is we carry out research in various areas, corruption-related research, and then profile recommendations. We've done that in mining, we've done that in public procurement, and we've done that in public financial management, and recommendations have been submitted. Some of the recommendations are to do with further improvement in the legal and police framework. But lastly, it's not only the police, legal, institutional framework per se that will not be sufficient. What is needed is enforcement of the statutes, the policies, implementation. This is where we also want to see further progress.
Thank you. I'll leave you, Honourable, to last, but let me move to Michael Reza. Michael, we're talking here about policy improvements. I think Commissioner Makamure talked about court rules. They're trying to change court rules. You talked about catch and release, bail issues, which are constitutional, etc., and some of the hamstring that you have 4 lawyers for one defendant. I mean, Michael, surely the NPA must have come up with some form of recommendations so that we can start dealing with corrupt cases. Because let me be clear, the perception is that people are getting away with corruption. That's the perception. Whether it's true or not is not the point. Why? Because they're not really seeing prosecutions. They hear the arrests, they hear newspaper articles, but they don't really see, as Hon Mliswa said, the end result, which is someone going to jail. And I know asset forfeiture obviously is a really good way of, keep them in their pockets. Michael, what would the NPA like to recommend to legislation, to the government, on changes that should be made to battle and tackle corruption?
At the risk of saying we are infringing accused persons' rights, really, the number of applications that are being made to the superior courts by accused persons, in fact, it's not all lawyers. I'm sorry to say this, but there's a number of lawyers whom I can count on fingers on my one hand who are doing that, but they have the majority of the cases. But what we have done as NPA in the meantime, we have made certain decisions which are operational. I regret I cannot disclose what we have, but we have taken a decision where we are.
You almost said it. You should have said it. You should have just said it. Yeah. Should have just said it. Yeah.
Okay. What we've also done is all cases, as the dockets come, I sit with the prosecutors, those who are in Harare province. We look at the complexity of the matter, and I give the prosecutors. We have 12 prosecutors who are anti-corruption court prosecutors. We have 5 courts and 12 prosecutors. And we have 2 prosecutors for each case, so that no case is remanded because the prosecutor is not there.
So Michael, you said you only have 12 prosecutors for corruption cases. Surely, with the level of corruption, particularly in the public sector, is that enough?
That we have 5 courts, and believe you me, that number is manageable. That number is safe. We can work with that number.
So maybe that's why the 300 cases are sitting in there. Sorry, I'm only joking.
I know, but the truth of the matter is the number of cases that are packed at the High Court, at the Supreme Court. We even have 2, I think, which are in the Constitutional Court. I don't know what that case is doing in the Constitutional Court, but we have 2 cases where an application has been made to the Constitutional Court. And what we do is, without fail, those cases which are in the superior courts, the prosecutor who is handling it in the magistrate's court must follow it. That's one of the strategies that we've done. Must follow it to the High Court, must follow it to the Supreme Court, so that the lawyer does not end up saying things which were not said in court.
So, sorry, Michael, I know because we are running out of time, and I want to get Honourable Mliswa for a few minutes for his response. But surely it seems to me, and I'm sure to the participants, that it's really easy to dodge corruption cases. You just have to throw legal things. You've got to appeal. You've got to whatever. You get issued by some. I mean, it seems really easy. Surely there must be a strategy to try and make it harder.
They should, because in the High Court, the judge can say, I'm giving you 20 minutes, make your pitch. After 20 minutes, you are done. Unfortunately, the magistrate does not have that power. So a lawyer can ramble. Sometimes the magistrate will then have to say, look, you are repeating the same thing you have said. So they are buying time by doing that. But in the superior courts, things like that can be curtailed. Yes.
All right, thank you. I think it's obviously clear that the NPA needs to work with stakeholders to see how we can tighten up, particularly when it comes to corrupt cases. But I'm sure, hopefully, the NPA is on that and is coming up with suggestions to government. Honourable Mliswa, I can only give you a few minutes, but really I want to talk about the policy gaps that I've asked the other participants on. And I also want to draw your attention, for example, to the expeditious amendment of the Criminal Matters Mutual Assistance Act, and of course the strengthening of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe's Financial Intelligence Unit, just among some measures that need to be done. Your comment on the policy gaps?
Now, to be honest with you, for the first time I've said I'm tired of passing laws in government, in parliament, which are not implemented. We're a country that enjoys change without review, without anything. Honorable Dr. Moyo said it here. All the laws are there. There's no enforcement. I'm just tired. Passing laws for what? When the current laws are strong enough and you're not implementing them, you're not enforcing. I mean, why should we be known as a nation that just writes and never implements, never executes? I am tired. For the first time, I have no desire of changing any law until we understand why the other law is not worked. You go from ZACC, you go to TSP, you go to NDSA 1, within 5 years, and you don't review what went wrong with this policy for you to come with another one. So for me, I'm not interested in passing any law at all. The issues that are at hand are that why are these laws not being enforced? All these organizations, taxpayers' money. If you go to the corruption courts right now, I hope it doesn't argue with me. Those judges and magistrates are actually tired of sitting. They have no cases. They are tired of sitting. They have no, and I say this honestly. They are tired of sitting. We're giving them money. Okay, they're driving cars. They're doing everything. But they're telling you there is no case before us. So why do we have anti-corruption judges and courts when matters are not being taken to them? So really, these policies, let's not be a nation of just changing policy without review or laws and so forth. Let us enforce and comply with what we have right now. For me, I am tired. That's all I can say about policies and laws.
Well, please don't be tired. We need your voice.
No, let us enforce.
We need your voice.
No, do you know what, Andy? It is a waste of money. Parliamentarians pass laws, and we can only do so much, but it's up to the people to enforce. And if you don't enforce, if you don't implement, what does it mean? Then you blame Parliament at the end of the day. That's a problem, where you now have the problem with ZACC and the Prosecutor General's office. ZACC, for as long as they've not been given powers to prosecute, they'll always be blamed. Because the other arm is prosecuting, they don't appeal. ZACC investigates, but they don't prosecute. So ZACC must be given powers to prosecute so that they tell the end of the story properly. For as long as that, because there is fighting between these arms and the corruption is happening. There was SACCO was busy arresting ZACC officers who were investigating somebody. There is just mayhem at times with disorder. You say, where is this coming from? Do we have order?
Thank you, Honourable. And I know for a fact, talking to Deputy Chair of ZACC and also Commissioner Hon Makamure, that ZACC is exactly asking for that, if I'm not mistaken. They're asking for the ability to also prosecute, not to
They will not be given that because the Prosecutor General is corrupt.
All right, but anyway, of course, we've come to the end of this panel discussion under the theme, taking stock of the scale and impact of public sector corruption in Zimbabwe. I, of course, would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank our hosts and partners to date, Transparency International Zimbabwe, Embassy of Sweden in Zimbabwe, GIZ, and the European Union.